What if World War I had never become a world war? Imagine a 1914 where Russia stayed neutral. Serbia fell alone, and the great powers never plunged Europe into total conflict. How would the Balkans, Europe, and even the United States have changed if the world we know had never faced the devastation of the Great War? In this alternate timeline, alliances shift, empires endure, and new powers rise, revealing a history that almost happened but didn't. Sparks in the Balkans. In 1912, Russia strongly supported the Balkan League, a coalition of Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro in their war against the Ottoman Empire. Russian leadership was heavily influenced by Pan-Slavism, a nationalistic ideology that sought to unite the Slavic peoples of Eastern and Southeastern Europe under Russian protection. For Russia, the Balkans were more than a regional interest. They were a geopolitical lifeline, a region where Orthodox Slavs could find common cause against centuries of Ottoman domination. The League's success in stripping the Ottoman Empire of its European territories seemed to validate Russian policy, and St. Petersburg envisioned a Balkan bloc friendly to its influence, extending Moscow's reach toward the Mediterranean. The apparent stability, however, was short-lived. Only a year later, the Second Balkan War erupted, exposing the fragility of Russian strategy. Bulgaria, Russia's favored ally, attacked Serbia and Greece over disputes concerning Macedonia's division, expecting Moscow's unequivocal support. Instead, the Russian government hesitated, wary of alienating Serbia or committing fully to a conflict that risked escalation. Bulgaria's defeat, inflicted by a coalition of Serbia, Greece, Romania, and even remnants of Ottoman forces, weakened Russia's influence and pushed Bulgaria closer into the orbit of Germany and Austria-Hungary. Serbia, meanwhile, became Russia's primary Balkan ally, but its prominence alarmed Austria-Hungary and created enduring tensions throughout the peninsula. This early failure left Russia in a precarious position. Having squandered the opportunity to dominate Balkan politics, the empire's prestige suffered, coupled with the recent humiliation in the Russo-Japanese War, the domestic discontent of 1905, and a series of economic and political challenges. Russia faced mounting pressure to assert itself decisively in any future crisis. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 would soon test this delicate balance, forcing decisions that could alter the course of Europe. The July Crisis. On the 28th of June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb connected to the Black Hand secret society. The assassination ignited a chain reaction of political and military pressures across Europe. Austria-Hungary, believing Serbia's response would be weak, issued an ultimatum on July 23, carefully crafted to be unacceptable. Unexpectedly, Serbia accepted nearly all conditions, revealing a willingness to cooperate and avoid war. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany saw this as a sign that a broader conflict could be avoided. But Austria-Hungary, driven by domestic and regional pressures, mobilized anyway. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia faced intense internal and external pressure to support Serbia, though the countries shared no binding treaty. The Slavic populations in the Balkans, Russian nationalist sentiment, and the pro-Serbian factions within the Duma demanded decisive action. Nicholas initially sought a peaceful resolution, engaging in the famous Willy-Niki telegrams with the German Kaiser. Both leaders expressed a desire to avoid war, yet the momentum toward conflict proved irresistible. Partial mobilization on July 29, intended as a deterrent, escalated the crisis. Germany, bound by its support for Austria-Hungary, interpreted Russian troop movements as a direct threat. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28. Russia's subsequent full mobilization on July 30 triggered Germany's preemptive war planning, France's involvement through the Franco-Russian alliance, and eventually Britain's entry, plunging Europe into the Great War. Without these escalations, Europe might have seen only a localized Balkan conflict. But history, as we know it, took a much darker path. Russia at war. Russia mobilized faster than anticipated, launching offensives into East Prussia and Galicia. In East Prussia, the Russian Second Army was encircled and decimated at Tannenberg. Galicia, by contrast, fell to Russian advances, capturing Lviv and destabilizing Austro-Hungarian defenses. Germany, forced to shift troops from the Western Front, faced unexpected pressure, revealing the complex interdependence of military strategy in a multi-front war. The 1915 Great Retreat was catastrophic for Russia. German and Austro-Hungarian forces pushed back into Poland, Galicia, and parts of Belarus, causing immense territorial losses. By the end of 1915, Russia suffered over 2 million casualties and faced a demoralized army, struggling against supply shortages, harsh weather, and logistical difficulties. Yet the Brusilov offensive of 1916 showcased Russian resilience, capturing 400,000 prisoners at a cost of nearly 1 million casualties. This success came too late to decisively shift the war's trajectory and instead masked a deepening domestic crisis. Worsening food shortages, inflation, and growing disillusionment with the war led to the February Revolution of 1917. Nicholas II abdicated, ending centuries of Romanov rule. The provisional government continued the war, but growing unrest and Lenin's return from exile enabled the Bolsheviks to seize power in the October Revolution. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk formalized Russia's exit from the war, ceding vast territories to Germany and altering Europe's balance of power dramatically. The Balkan disaster. Imagine an alternate timeline in which Russia remained neutral in 1914. With a public declaration refusing to mobilize, Serbia would face Austria-Hungary alone. The Serbian army, numbering roughly 230,000 men and battle-hardened from the Balkan Wars, could mount a determined defense using mountainous terrain and guerrilla tactics. Despite their skill and knowledge of the land, they would ultimately be outnumbered by Austria-Hungary's concentrated force of 400,000 troops, making prolonged resistance unlikely. Montenegro, small but loyal, would probably join Serbia, contributing around 12,800 troops, offering temporary support in key mountain passes, but unable to shift the overall balance. Bulgaria, seizing the opportunity to reclaim territory lost in the Second Balkan War, would attack from the south with 450,000 men. Targeting Vardar, Macedonia, Greece and Romania would likely remain neutral. Greece, under Prime Minister Venizelos, might sympathize with Serbia but fear Bulgarian retaliation, while Romania had no immediate incentive to intervene. By mid-1915, Austria-Hungary and Bulgaria would likely partition Serbia. Belgrade would fall, Montenegro would be absorbed, and Macedonia would be ceded to Bulgaria. The occupation would be harsh. Austria-Hungary would suppress Serbian nationalism with strict measures, while Bulgaria would implement Bulgarization policies in newly annexed territories. Though victorious, Austria-Hungary and Bulgaria would face persistent unrest, and the Balkans would remain a volatile region, setting the stage for future conflicts and leaving Serbia's hopes of uniting the South Slavs in ruins. Greece, versus Bulgaria. Greece, initially neutral, soon faced Bulgarian aggression in eastern Macedonia. In late 1915, Bulgaria launched a surprise offensive, deploying around 150,000 troops with the aim of consolidating control over the region and extending the influence gained from Serbia's partition. Greek forces, although smaller, were well entrenched and benefited from artillery superiority, local militias loyal to the crown, and access to fortified coastal positions along the Aegean. Bulgarian gains were initially limited to minor towns and border settlements, as Greek defensive lines effectively slowed the advance and inflicted casualties that disrupted enemy momentum. By early 1916, the front had largely stabilized along the Struma River, forming entrenched positions reminiscent of larger-scale European conflicts. Greece launched targeted counteroffensives in Thessaloniki and Kavala, aiming to push back Bulgarian troops and secure strategic locations. Bulgaria, meanwhile, focused on consolidating gains in Macedonia, fortifying supply lines, and preparing for further offensives. The conflict, though geographically limited, reflected the attritional nature of World War I, with prolonged skirmishes, disrupted supply chains, and harsh conditions for soldiers on both sides. The Ottoman Empire, maintaining official neutrality, covertly supplied arms and intelligence to Greece to counterbalance Bulgarian advances, creating a complex web of influence in the region. Britain, intent on preserving Mediterranean trade routes and maintaining strategic influence, reinforced naval forces and exerted diplomatic pressure on both sides. By mid-1916, Bulgarian offensives had stalled due to overstretched resources and sustained Greek resistance. Negotiations mediated by Britain and Austria-Hungary culminated in the Treaty of London, which preserved Thessaloniki for Greece while ceding a narrow strip of eastern Macedonia, including Drama, to Bulgaria. The treaty left Greece as the relative victor, strengthening Prime Minister Venizelos's domestic position. Yet Bulgaria retained considerable influence in the Balkans, poised to shape future regional dynamics. Albania and regional turmoil. Albania, under Prince Wilhelm, became an indirect but significant battleground during the Balkan conflicts. Waves of refugees and partisans fleeing the fighting in Serbia and Montenegro poured into Albanian territory, heightening existing ethnic and religious tensions among Albanians, Orthodox and Catholic minorities, and tribal factions. The northern regions saw increased influence from Austria-Hungary, which sought to secure a buffer zone against potential Serbian resurgence. In the south, Greece extended its influence to protect strategic interests, while Bulgaria attempted to project power in eastern border regions, exploiting instability to consolidate gains in Macedonia. Amid these pressures, the Albanian state teetered precariously between lawlessness, factional control, and reliance on external oversight. Britain and Austria-Hungary closely monitored Albanian stability, understanding that unrest could trigger wider regional conflicts and destabilize the delicate balance in the Balkans. Greek forces withdrew from southern Albania, leaving the young prince's government dependent on foreign subsidies and political support to preserve sovereignty. The complex interplay of external powers and local factions created a fragile equilibrium where minor skirmishes or political missteps could escalate into broader confrontations. These developments reflected how the Balkan War's consequences extended far beyond Serbia, reshaping alliances, territorial control, and diplomatic influence throughout the region. With Austria-Hungary and Bulgaria emerging militarily stronger and Greece consolidating its position both diplomatically and militarily, the Balkan balance of power had shifted dramatically. Russia's neutrality allowed these events to unfold without intervention from a major Eastern power, fundamentally altering the geopolitical landscape of southeastern Europe. Over time, Albania's position as a buffer state highlighted the intricate link between local instability and the broader strategic interests of great powers, setting the stage for ongoing tensions that would continue to influence Balkan politics for years to come. Russia preserved. By avoiding war in 1914, Russia escaped the catastrophic human and material losses that historically crippled the empire. Its army remained largely intact, with officers and trained soldiers preserved for future defense, while industrial centers were spared destruction, keeping production steady. Tsar Nicholas II retained authority, avoiding the immediate collapse that the Great War historically accelerated. Yet neutrality carried significant internal consequences. Panslavist factions in the Duma condemned the Tsar for abandoning Serbia, accusing him of forsaking Russia's historic role as protector of the Slavs. Diplomats in France and Britain viewed the inaction as a betrayal, straining alliances and diminishing Russian influence in European diplomacy. Social pressures continued to mount at home. Peasants demanded meaningful land reform. Urban workers pushed for improved wages and conditions, and minority groups, Poles, Finns, and Caucasian populations pressed for greater autonomy. Localized revolts tested the government's capacity to maintain order, while portions of the military questioned Nicholas's judgment, perceiving neutrality as a sign of weakness or cowardice. The Tsar faced a constitutional crisis, needing to balance domestic dissatisfaction, elite criticism, and political legitimacy with the goal of preserving international credibility. Economically, industrial modernization continued, though slower without wartime urgency. Geopolitically, Russia's absence from the Balkans reduced its influence across southeastern Europe and Central Asia, leaving strategic openings for Britain in Persia and the Persian Gulf. The empire, though preserved in territory and manpower, faced simmering internal tensions and a long-term need for reform to prevent future instability. Austria-Hungary consolidates. Austria-Hungary's victory over Serbia and Montenegro solidified its strategic position in the Balkans, expanding its influence over former Serbian territories and securing the Adriatic coast. Yet the empire remained fraught with internal contradictions. Its multi-ethnic composition, Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Croats, Bosnians, Romanians, Slovenians, and others, created persistent friction. Nationalist movements, partisan resistance, and competing elite interests constantly challenged imperial authority, keeping the state in a delicate balance between stability and unrest. The death of Emperor Franz Joseph in 1916 brought Charles I to the throne. A young, reform-minded monarch, Charles sought to federalize the empire, granting autonomy to various ethnic groups in line with ideas similar to the United States of Greater Austria. His vision, however, was resisted by the entrenched Hungarian elites, who feared losing their privileges and influence, leading to political deadlock. Meanwhile, unrest continued, particularly in regions with Serbian partisan activity, forcing the empire to enforce martial law and deploy troops to maintain control. Although Austria-Hungary avoided outright collapse, the combination of slow political reform, elite resistance, and persistent ethnic tensions ensured a gradual decline. External pressures from Italy, which eyed Adriatic territories, added further strain. The empire's survival in the post-war era would depend on carefully balancing reform, diplomacy, and the management of its diverse populations, a task that would continue to challenge Vienna and Budapest. Germany and the Ottomans. Germany gained a substantial strategic advantage from Russia's neutrality. With no threat on the Eastern Front, Berlin could focus on consolidating its economy, modernizing its military, and managing alliances more effectively. The Kaiser and his advisors explored strengthening ties with the Ottoman Empire, aiming to secure access to Middle Eastern markets, vital oil resources, and strategic positions that could counterbalance British influence in the region. German industrial and military planning advanced without the distraction and costs of a large-scale war, allowing the Reich to expand its infrastructure, technology, and naval presence. The Ottoman Empire, spared the catastrophic pressures of a Russian attack, used this period to implement internal reforms and modernize its armed forces. Ethnic and sectarian tensions, particularly with Arab, Kurdish, and Armenian populations, remained unresolved, but the central government retained enough authority to enforce order and maintain territorial integrity. The Young Turk regime focused on strengthening administrative control, reinforcing garrisons, and improving logistics, preparing for potential regional conflicts without provoking European powers. In East Asia, Japan closely monitored these developments, taking advantage of Europe's distraction to expand its influence in Manchuria and Mongolia. The United States, largely removed from European entanglements, concentrated on its own economic growth, military modernization, and influence across the Pacific. American trade and naval power gradually extended into the Philippines, China, and the wider Pacific, setting the stage for competition with both Britain and Japan. This period of strategic maneuvering laid the groundwork for a complex web of alliances and rivalries, shaping the geopolitical landscape for decades to come. A different world. With Europe largely at peace and insulated from a continental war, the United States turned its attention inward and outward in equal measure. Industrial growth accelerated, fueled by technological innovation and urban expansion, while the U.S. leveraged the Panama Canal as a strategic hub for naval power and commercial dominance. American businesses sought opportunities abroad, investing heavily in Asia to compete with both Germany and Britain, particularly in China and the Philippines, solidifying economic and political influence in the Pacific. Isolationism still guided foreign policy, but strategic interests shaped subtle engagement and naval buildup. Bulgaria emerged from the Balkan conflicts as a regional power, its army battle-hardened and territorial ambitions partially fulfilled. Greece, having successfully defended key territories such as Thessaloniki and Kavala, strengthened its diplomatic and military position in the region, consolidating gains and deterring further Bulgarian aggression. Austria-Hungary avoided immediate collapse, but internal ethnic tensions and political gridlock persisted, forcing a slow decline, while Charles I attempted limited reforms. Russia preserved its military and economic resources by remaining neutral, but domestic unrest, social grievances, and political factionalism created ongoing challenges for Nicholas II's regime. By the mid-1920s, the global landscape had shifted profoundly. European powers adjusted to the absence of a great war, recalibrating strategic priorities, while the Ottoman Empire focused on internal reform and retaining authority over its diverse territories. Localized conflicts, ethnic disputes, and emerging rivalries continued across the Balkans, the Middle East, and Asia. Strategic competition for resources, trade, and influence intensified. History's trajectory had been fundamentally altered, producing a world simultaneously more stable, yet fraught with unresolved tensions and opportunities for conflict.